view from here is a little different to that. I don't actually know what church this is, by the way. What interested me most was that it was attached to a story which I knew absolutely nothing about. Apparently, this is a thing. Having the words, "Sir, I would see Jesus," inscribed on the pulpit. Not so that you can see it, but so that I can see it. Apparently, this is a thing. And the point of it is to always remind the preacher that the point of proclaiming the word isn't education, and it isn't to get you to think what you're supposed to think. It's to give you an experience of Jesus. My preaching is supposed to inspire you to be able to see Jesus. We're not going to take a survey on whether or not that works, but that's the point of this. Can I see that next one, Damien? This is on your bulletin this morning. It might actually work better if you use the one that's on your bulletin. But if you stare at the 4 dots in the middle of this for 30 seconds and then close your eyes, you should be able to see Jesus. It's one of those optical, I forget what they're called, things. But if only there were an optometrist here, or say in Ponoka, who could explain that. But if you stare at it for about 30 seconds and then close your eyes, you'll be able to see the image of Jesus. Not this black and white thing like this. You'll see the reverse of it, and it'll look more like Jesus. So I have, in fact, accomplished the goal of today's sermon, which is to give you an experience of seeing Jesus. That isn't the point of this morning's sermon. Can we see the next one, please, Damien? This is the point. Because that's the point of the stories today. So, some Greeks come to see Jesus. Well, first of all, they may not have actually been Greeks. This might have been John's way of simply saying they weren't Jews. Although it's entirely possible they could have been Jews from Greece, I guess. The point is, they're anybody. They're you and me, they're anybody. And they come to see Jesus. And they come to see Jesus because this is the time of the Passover, and they're in Jerusalem, and people come to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And so they would be in Jerusalem. They may have heard what was going on with Jesus. By now, Jesus had become quite famous. He does cool stuff. He says cool stuff. People want to see him. Just like Nicodemus, a couple of weeks ago, Nicodemus came to see him because he'd heard so much about Jesus, right? And wanted to see him. Before that, people had come to Jesus and said, "Hey, show us another one," right? Because they'd seen the miracles, and they wanted Jesus to keep doing that cool miracle stuff because, that's a heck of a trick. In other words, they wanted to see the show. They'd heard about this Jesus. They want to see this Jesus. This is a show me the money kind of moment. They want to see Jesus do his Jesus thing. And so they go to the 2 disciples that conveniently have Greek names, by the way, and they say, "We want to see Jesus," and they go, "Sure, we'll get you in to see Jesus." It's like they have a backstage pass or something. And they go to see Jesus, and the 2 disciples say, "There's 2 guys here, they would really like to see you, Jesus." And Jesus immediately says, "Oh, that's awesome. It's just like when I first called the disciples. You remember those 2 disciples that they were following me around? And I said, 'What do you guys want?' And they said, 'We just want to see what you're doing.' And so I said, 'Come and see.' And they followed around, and then they stayed. It was just like that." He didn't say that, actually. The disciples came to Jesus, and Jesus said, "Not now, it's time for everything to happen." All that stuff I was telling you about, that you didn't want me to say. Remember Peter saying, "Don't tell people that, Jesus." Because Jesus is going around saying, "I'm going to die. I'm going to be treated really badly. I'm going to die. I'm going to come back to life in 3 days." And they're saying, don't be telling people that. And so this is a moment in which these guys come to see Jesus, and Jesus says, "Not now, it's time for that stuff to happen." And this is the end of the moment at which Jesus' ministry ends, and Jesus sort of does the last walk to the cross, right? It's time to die. Wouldn't you be disappointed if you're those Greek guys? You came to see this famous Jesus. You'd really like to see what's happening because you'd heard really cool stuff. And not only do you not get to see the cool stuff, Jesus doesn't want to see you because it's time. For what? Well, it's time for all this to end because Don't you think that's how they would have seen that moment? We came to see all the good stuff that was happening, that you'd been doing with your life, and here you are saying, not now, it's time for me to go and die. There are times when I really wonder, I've said this before, I think too many times probably. I like to spend my time wondering and thinking and pondering the life of Jesus. Because I think that's what our life needs to be about. It's how Jesus lived. And there are people for whom the death of Jesus is the most important thing. Jesus sacrifices his life for our sin. That's the point of Jesus. And I go, death is the point of Jesus? Or is life the point of Jesus? And here's the time when we really need to wonder about this, because Palm Sunday is next week, and that's the beginning of Holy Week. That's the week of walking with Jesus to the cross, and then the resurrection. And there are all sorts, we're going to talk about this next week, by the way, but there are all sorts of churches, because we've become a Sunday people. You got your Palm Sunday, and then the next time you got the people together, it's Easter Day. Yay, Jesus coming into Jerusalem. Yay. Yay, Jesus is alive. Excuse me? We missed something, didn't we? We missed a piece. Yeah, we did. And we often do. In fact, back when, and don't say this was a long time ago, because it wasn't that long time ago that I was a kid. I went to church every day in Holy Week because I sang in the cathedral choir, and they did that. They had a service every day, and so every day I got a little piece of the story, just as it happens. And we don't do that anymore. We don't have time for that. So we tell the story a little bit differently, and we don't spend enough time there. And yet, here's this setup for that. The week before Palm Sunday, the week before we celebrate Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, that's the language we usually use, here's Jesus saying, I don't have time to show you all the good stuff that I've been doing because it's time to go and die. And see, that just kind of reminds me of something that's really important that we often miss out. We just played Where's Jesus? With the kids. And where's Jesus? Jesus is everywhere because you're all Jesus. We are all Jesus. There's Jesus in all of us. You're just waiting for me to say the magic word now, aren't you? Because you know I'm going to say Jesusing sooner or later. We should be out Jesusing. It's a verb because it's about Jesus' life. Jesus showed us how to live. That's what it's about. And we should go and live like that. And when we do live like that, we are being the Jesus that is in all of us. So I said to the kids, and I hope you as well, we need to look to see Jesus. Look around us and see Jesus at work. How do you see Jesus? When do you see Jesus? How do you perceive Jesus at work? And here's the thing that is a problem with people like me, who spend all their time reminding you that it's about the life Jesus lived, is when we then do that, we think we only see Jesus when somebody does an act of kindness or something good. We only see Jesus when there's compassion and love happening. That's the only time we see Jesus. And it's not. And next week is going to remind us of that. Because next week is a week that we get to see the Jesus that's broken, that's hurting, that's suffering. The Jesus that Peter said, don't be telling people about that. And we don't anymore. We avoid it. We leap quite often, or we talk about it on Palm Sunday. So, triumphant entry into Jerusalem. By the way, he's dead at the end of this week. That's literally how that goes. And we don't spend enough time wondering about the Jesus that was suffering and hurting. But You know, if we only ever see Jesus in people who are kind and thoughtful and compassionate and caring, and we never see Jesus in the hurting and the broken, we're probably missing most everyone at some point. Jesus is in the hurting and the broken and the suffering. It's not just that we can be Jesus by helping them. It's that we see Jesus in engaging them. We see Jesus in people who live on the street. We see people who are fighting their own demons, as it were. We see Jesus in people who are hurting, who are sick, who are suffering. Jesus is in those people too. It's not like there's suddenly an absence of Jesus because things aren't going great. Jesus is there. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Robin, you just pointed out that Jesus is in everyone and that Jesus is in everything and at every time, so obviously Jesus is everywhere. Why isn't the world a fantastic place? Because Jesus isn't everywhere, obviously. Because Jesus isn't in hate. Jesus isn't in intentionally hurting people. Jesus isn't in oppressing people or having power over other people. Jesus isn't in being mean to people. We are fully in that. Jesus is probably watching that and feeling hurt and broken. And that's the thing, is when we look to see Jesus in people, we need to know, and it may seem like I'm stating the obvious, but we need to know that hate is not Jesus, love is Jesus. We need to know that being kind and thoughtful and considerate to others, being respectful of others is Jesus. Engaging people as people, they are equal to us. We are all equal. That's Jesus. Treating people like they're anything less than us or disrespecting them because, they're not as good as us, that is not being Jesus. Perhaps even seeing their hurt would help us to recognize Jesus there and help us to change that. And see, that's the thing. We're really... We spend a lot of time, because it's most of the story, isn't it? It's all the rest of the year, it's the other 51 weeks, telling the story of Jesus' life and the good things that Jesus does and the good things that Jesus teaches us to do and how Jesus teaches us to do really good Jesusing. And we have this 1 week in which we get to see the broken Jesus. Maybe we ought to look around some of those other stories, too. Maybe we ought to look around at some of those other stories, those other moments where maybe we can see how human and fragile Jesus is, so that perhaps we might actually come to see how possible it can be that Jesus is in us because there's humanity in Jesus. Remember that story about the woman that comes to Jesus, and she's not a Jew, and she comes to Jesus and is talking to Jesus, and Jesus says that wonderful thing about how, the dogs aren't worthy to eat the crumbs under the table kind of thing. And the woman goes, but we're all children of God. And Jesus goes, yeah, okay, you're right. That's a moment of Jesus learning, like we do. What about those other moments where maybe Jesus, that picture of when we were doing the Where's Jesus thing, the guy falling off the deck? Do you think Jesus ever stumbled? Like a normal person? What about when Jesus was hungry? Like a normal person might be. I still think Jesus is a lot rounder than we pictured Jesus, because I'm sure he ate a lot. He might not have even liked beets. Who knows? The point is, the more we can identify with some of the humanity of Jesus, surely we can then find Jesus in us, because we can see some of us in Jesus. In fact, can't we do that with each other? can't we? I mean, instead of being quite so competitive sometimes, or being quite so quick to recognize how we're different, couldn't we spend more time recognizing how we're similar? That's often our biggest issue with questions around like interfaith issues, right? There are different religions in the world. Ours is right, of course, but there are different ones. They're just different. What? What makes ours right and everyone else is wrong? Maybe they just have a different way to God. Maybe if we recognize it was the same God, that might be the first step towards understanding how they come to that God in a different way. Maybe if we actually had conversations with people that we don't really want to have a conversation with because they're different. Maybe if we had conversations with them, we'd find how we're similar. More ways in which we're similar. More ways in which we might recognize Jesus in somebody who maybe doesn't even know who Jesus is. And it's okay to think that, because even the Pope said that. It's true. Even the Pope said that people who don't personally know, people who don't know Jesus will still come to God, to heaven. We're more similar than anything else. We just need to find what those things are. And that's the great reminder about stories like this, is that Jesus wasn't always the kind, generous, gentle, loving perfectness that we picture Jesus as. Sometimes Jesus was broken. I think Jesus cried. I think Jesus laughed. I think Jesus maybe sometimes stumbled off the deck with a plate full of food, just like in the picture there. Because Jesus is in all of us. Let's try and recognize that. Let's try and see the Jesus in all of us. There's an interesting single phrase in the gospel story this morning that may appear as though it has nothing to do with any of this other stuff. And it's the part about how the seed needs to fall to the ground, the grain of wheat needs to fall to the ground and die in order that fruit may come of it. Did I just say fruit came from wheat? You know what I mean. It's a miracle, yes. It's a miracle. In order for something to come from the seed has to be in the ground. Right? It's the metaphor for Jesus dying, being in the tomb, come resurrection, right? New life. New life. What does that have to do with any of this? Everything that we learn, everything that we share here, everything that you share with other people, everything that you experience can become a seed to share with other people. Every one of those moments, the more moments you have, the more seeds that you have to share with other people. The more moments that you share with other people, the more seeds they have to share with other people. It's how we grow. If those seeds are simply behavior, this is how we do it, so we're going to keep doing that, how is that growing anything? If that seed is something that comes from your heart. And here's where I think this story from the gospel connects with that story from Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah's prophecy of the day is surely coming. There'll be a new covenant, which of course is how we Christians tend to perceive Jesus, is the new covenant. There'll be a new covenant that will be written on our hearts. It won't be written on stone like the Ten Commandments in Sinai. It'll be written in your heart. That's seeds from Jesus. How many times do you remember how many times you hear Jesus saying, it's not about the letter of the law, it's about what's at the heart of it. Live that. Live what's at the heart of the law. Live from your heart. Those are the seeds that grow the kingdom of heaven. We can see Jesus in each other. We can see Jesus everywhere. If we look and we're prepared to engage it and accept it and share it. Those are the seeds that grow the kingdom of heaven. Here. Not later. Not after the death part. But here. That's the new life. That's the living of Jesus in the world.